We have heard a lot about synodality, about the need for the laity to take a greater role in things in the name of participation and inclusion and dialogue. The great promise, we are told, is that the church was synodal to begin with, that the laity actively participated in the liturgy, that the laity actively participated in the governance of the church in the early days, and that over time the church became more rigid and more clericalist and more hierarchical, and synodality was cast away. That's a great duty that Vatican II took upon itself, was to reclaim this synodal nature through the spirit of Vatican II, most emphasized by documents signed by Pope Paul VI in the 1960s and 70s, reestablishing the synodal nature of the church. But it really took until Francis to recognize the need for active synodality and that the church must transform and re-embrace its synodal nature. And only through then will the church finally fully embrace Vatican II and experience the new Pentecost, the new Advent that the post-conciliar popes have invoked, that great promise will be realized. Synodality involves, at its core, the active participation of the laity in the life of the church beyond Mass. And we have seen this with Francis promoting lay people to governance positions in the Roman Curia. But we've also seen this at the Synod of Synodality, where Francis, along with cardinals and bishops, sat as equals with lay persons and priests to discuss issues in the life of the church. In Germany and other places which have been advocating for exactly the same things that the laity have advocated for at the broader synod, the results have been that the laity are being placed in charge of dioceses, functionally in charge of dioceses, with the bishop still having technical authority, but the end result being the laity becoming apostolic administrators of parishes and having very real say in the governing of dioceses. They have said, the people running the synod have said, that they want doctrinal influence in the church in the hands of the laity, decisions on doctrine. And with doctrine comes decisions on dogma and on the real practice of the faith. Synodality is an authentic, real revolution in the church. This is hard sometimes to explain to some people because they don't believe it. And so I'm going to let you hear from two Modernist cardinals whose names are very well known to those who've been paying attention, as they explain this to you in recent statements they've made, very recent, in the last few days. So for the first one, we go today to Cardinal Reinhard Marx from LifeSite News with this headline: Cardinal Marx, worldwide synodal church without purely clerical rule is in the making. Cardinal Marx called for changes to the theology of holy orders and said the church should be subjected to a social scientific examination in the heretical pro-James Martin prelate's latest comments against Catholic teaching. Anytime you see somebody say the long-standing theology of fill in the blank needs re-examining, that person you are seeing say that is without question an enemy of the church and an enemy of the faith. They have placed themselves in opposition to the magisterium of the church. They have placed themselves in opposition to the popes, to all the councils, including the Council of Trent, and before that, they have placed themselves at odds with Christ. The church was established as hierarchical in nature by Jesus Christ. We see it in the Gospels. We see it in the Acts of the Apostles. We see it in the writings of the church fathers. And we see how this hierarchy developed organically. Of course, the church was more decentralized in the early centuries, when the Catholic faithful had to remain underground and live as Catholics secretly. But once it became legal, it began to get centralized, because that's what was logical to do. You had plenty of writings from before that happened of popes ruling on issues in far-flung parts of the church. And with the response from theologians at the time doctors of the church saying, Rome has spoken, the matter is settled. This is nothing new. But now they're calling for a change in the theology of holy orders. The theology of holy orders developed organically from the time of the apostles. But that's not good enough for Cardinal Marx. That's not good enough for those trying to build their new synodal church. Now, when quoting this article, LifeSite, when they wrote this, they would take a statement from Cardinal Marx and then refute it as they went on. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to simply take all the parts from what he said, and put it in one quote so you can hear what he said without having to go through the refutation. The refutation is fine, but it does bog us down a little bit. The link to this article within a couple of hours of this live stream, or you could probably find this on LifeSite if you just go there, if you want to go directly there. But here's Cardinal Marx in his own words. Quote, Cardinal Reinhard Marx has said that a worldwide synodal church without a purely clerical rule is in the making. In an essay for the German magazine Heretic Correspondence, entitled Church on the Horizon of Modernity, as a quick aside, I did glance at that article. He does say everything he says there here. The German cardinal, who rejects Catholic teaching on various subjects, claimed that, quote, a church of the future can only be imagined with greater participation of all, with greater clarification of responsibilities, with better, more transparent communication from top to bottom and from bottom to top. A worldwide synodal church that is in the making, Marx wrote. A purely clerical rule, as Canon 129 suggests the Code of Canon Law, will probably not be possible, suggesting that lay people could take on the role of priests and bishops. Did you hear that? Lay people taking on the non-ordained, taking on the role of priests and bishops. Quoting Swiss sociologist Franz Xavier Kaufmann, Cardinal Marx asserted that, quote, there are many more possibilities for changing the social shape of the church, including the theology of holy orders, than some people assume. In his essay, Marx repeatedly claimed that the church must learn from the so-called social sciences. He wrote that, quote, an important perspective for the future of the church, its institutions, and its functioning is to subject it to a social scientific examination, to compare it with other organizations, both theoretically and empirically, and thus always in the context of society. We must continue to advance this line of thinking through research and interdisciplinary dialogue between theology and the social sciences, Marx opined. End quote. In case you're not aware, I actually am a trained social scientist. I have a PhD in essentially political science, one of its sister fields, but essentially political science. And I will tell you that this is a terrible idea because there's no such thing as a social science. The social sciences are not scientific. They play at it, they pretend at it, but when you read their studies, once they teach you how to read with quantitative methods, their studies and their findings and their methodology, the entire notion that they are scientific falls apart. But that's not even the problem here. The very real problem is he wants the church to subject itself to the wisdom of the world and its religion, which is very much the social sciences. That is what he's seeking here. That is a diabolical inversion of how it should be. The church should be consulted at the very least by the secular world on matters of faith and morals before the secular governments do their secular government thing. But unfortunately, that's not how it works here. The church is to be set to the standards of the secular world. We're to meet them. That is what he's seeking. He believes that is what will get people back in the pews, to make it the church indistinguishable from an NGO. And he's not alone in this nonsense either. His ideological ally, Cardinal Walter Casper, also chimed in a separate article, saying something equally ridiculous here. In this article here from katholisch.de, for those not aware, katholisch.de is the official news arm of the German bishops. Think of it as the Vatican News of the German bishops, or you can think of it as Catholic News Agency of the German bishops. This is when somebody is published here, the German bishops at the very least have no problem with what they're saying. If not that, they are often fully endorsing it. So from the German bishops website, we get this nonsense. Headline: Cardinal Casper church needs more leadership from the laity. More influence from non-priests in the Catholic Church is a central demand in the current reform debate. Cardinal Walter Casper believes it is justified. After all, priests and bishops have one task above all others. So again, the Catholic Church is hierarchical in nature. Laity, we have our place in prayer, supporting the efforts of the hierarchy, and to engage in the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. And one of the corporal works of mercy, by the way, is to correct the sinner. Most of the time we think of that as finding another layperson in our lives who has walked away from the church or has never been in the church and trying to pull them out of a life of sin. But I would argue that correction of the sinner includes members of the hierarchy, which is what they're doing here. But those are our places. Governing the church belongs to those who are ordained and have been consecrated as bishops. But this is again an attempt to bring the spirit of the age into the church. And let me make something absolutely clear here. This is an illusion, what they're doing, because I think they see the tide in the culture of the church turning. Future priests, those coming from seminary now and the more recently ordained, tend to be much more conservative across the entire West than their predecessors. The growth of the traditional mass, the demand for more reverent Novus Ordo masses, all of those things point to an increase among traditional Catholics, traditionally minded Catholics, and conservative Catholics. And this worries them. So the laity that will be in charge of all of this shared governance, they will be handpicked by prelates of the church. This will create an illusion of democracy in the church. Not that true democracy in the church would be a good thing. The church is hierarchical in nature and always has been. It is much more akin to a monarchy than democracy. But this democracy of the church will be an illusion, with the laity largely serving as tools of the St. Gallen types in the Roman Curia. This will entrench their power forever. At least that's their scheme here. If you don't believe me, let's go to this very short article, again with this headline: Cardinal Casper, Church needs more leadership from the laity. More influence from non-priests in the Catholic Church is central demand of the current reform debate. Cardinal Walter Casper believes it is justified. After all, priests and bishops have one task above all others. And presumably here he means the salvation of souls, which I don't know how the salvation of souls is furthered by putting laity in charge of the church. The worst catechized generation in history. Worse than the previous generation, which had been until that time the worst catechized generation in history. And unless something turns around, the next generation will probably be the worst generation that's been catechized in history, unless we hit that sort of inflection point where the only people still going to mass are the ones who actually have the faith. That is coming at some point when the numbers continue to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. Here's Cardinal Casper's proposal for all this. Quote, the long-serving curial Cardinal Walter Casper has spoken out in favor of greater delegation of church leadership tasks to non-ordained Catholics, lay people. In an interview with the Viennese theologian Jan Heiner Tuck on the online portal communio.de on the Feast of the Ascension, when he said this, he said that one of the most urgent tasks of bishops and priests is to proclaim the gospel according to the needs of the times. As an aside, that's an interesting qualification. According to the needs of the times. Today, as an apostolic times, we should entrust many other leadership tasks to deacons or qualified lay people, women and men, Casper added. He referred to the biblical Acts of the Apostles, which also deals with the election of deacons in the early Christian community. A divided and polarized church repels more than it invites, the former president of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity continued. Only the unanimous witness and practice of love, the commitment to the poor and those living on the margins, as well as against blatant injustice, war, and violence, can make our message of God's love and mercy credible anew. Casper referred to an appeal by the Jesuit Alfred Delp, who was ended by the Germans 80 years ago. Before his passing, Delp had written in the Church's handbook, "A return to diaconia is the way out of the crisis." In the interview, Casper also lamented a, quote, doomsday mood and lamentation in the church. The current church crisis is extremely complex and has many causes. Now we're going to pause here. Casper, like all the German bishops, invoke the Ted McCarrick problem, which was a problem all across the Western Church. He invokes that as their reasoning for this, disregarding that all the Ted McCarrick priests, 99.9% of them, were also fellow travelers with James Martin. And until they admit that, and then take the needed action, which is to essentially make the priesthood full of men dedicated to purity again, until they do that, this problem that they think is there will not be taken care of. They are right, there is a crisis in the church, and there's a crisis in the priesthood, but it's not clericalism. It's quite the opposite. Here's what he says. The Ted McCarrick problem is one reason, but not the only one. It is also not enough to point the finger at the evil world and the secularization of our Western societies. Christians should hold up a self-critical mirror to themselves and ask whether the crisis is not above all a sign of our forgetfulness of Christ. And he's right there. There is that. But the secularization of the world is at least part and parcel of the church opening the windows of the world to the secular world to bring in the breath of fresh air. And they did it at that critical point in history when the secular world went off the rails in the 1960s. And it's just gotten worse since then. The 91-year-old Casper was Bishop of Rottenburg, Stuttgart from 1989 to 1999. He was then appointed to the Vatican, where he was most recently president of the Pontifical Ecumenical Council until 2010. The clergyman, who has been a cardinal since 2001, previously taught theology in Munster and Tübingen, etc., etc. What they don't tell you here is Walter Casper, as cardinal, had been one of the most influential voices in the church and was advocating for everything that we got in Amoris Laetitia. And he was advocating for that since the 90s. And he had been rejected numerous times on communion for the divorced and remarried. He was very happy with Amoris Laetitia. He was also very happy with Fiducia Supplicans. Bear that in mind. Now, if you want an example of what some of this looks like in practice, we have Francis's sermon from the Feast of the Ascension. He gave us a homily in the papal chapel on the subject of hope, but he redefines it. And remember, hope is a theological virtue. The theological virtue of hope is so simple that, to give you a good example of this, I pulled this just from the Diocese of La Crosse, their website. And here's their definition of the theological virtue of hope. Yes, we can go into much more detail than this, but for the typical everyday Catholic, this quote here, this definition suffices. So from them, hope is a theological virtue, which means that this gift comes from God and leads us back to God. We receive the gift of hope from God in baptism. Hope allows the possibility for Christians to trust in God, especially with things that seem difficult or impossible to receive, such as salvation. See the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. The theological virtue of hope is the power by which we desire the kingdom of heaven as our happiness, placing our trust in Christ's promises and relying not on our own strength, but on the grace of the Holy Spirit. Jesus will give us the graces that we need for the journey to heaven. End quote. Simple. Theological virtue of hope is our ability to lean on God, right? That's what it is. Now, Francis's homily, to give you an idea, because according to him, hope is recognizing that we can build utopia on earth. Remember where he's launching a new Jubilee year. I'm fine with Jubilee years. I actually like the idea of more Jubilee years where the indulgences flow and they're very easy to get as long as you do certain very Catholic things like he did in 2015. That was totally fine. I don't think anybody criticized him for that then. Here's what he had to say. Amid shouts of joy, Jesus ascends to heaven, where he takes his seat at the right hand of the Father. As we have just heard, he embraced death so that we might be heirs to life eternal. The ascension of the Lord is not his separation or removal from us, but rather the fulfillment of his mission. Jesus first ascended to us so that we might ascend to the Father. He came down to us in order to raise us on high. He descended even to the depths of the earth, so the gates of heaven might open wide above us. He destroyed our death, that we might receive life forever. This is the basis of our hope. Christ, in ascending to heaven, brings to the very heart of God our humanity, with all its hopes and expectations, so that we, his members, might be confident of following where he, our head and founder, has gone before. Brothers and sisters, it is this hope, based on Christ who died and rose again, that we wish to celebrate, ponder, and proclaim to the whole world in the coming Jubilee, which is almost upon us. This hope has nothing to do with mere human optimism or the ephemeral expectation of some earthly benefit. No, it is something real, already accomplished in Christ, a gift daily bestowed upon us until the time when we will be one in the embrace of his love. Christian hope, as St. Peter writes, is an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading. So far, so good, right? Christian hope sustains the journey of our lives, even when the road ahead seems winding and exhausting. It opens our eyes to future possibilities whenever resignation or pessimism attempts to imprison us. It makes us see the promise of good at times when evil seems to prevail. Christian hope fills us with serenity when our hearts are burdened by sin and failure. It makes us dream of new humanity and gives us courage in our efforts to build a fraternal and peaceful world. There it is, even when it seems barely worth the effort. Such as hope, the gift that the Lord bestowed upon us in baptism, etc., etc. And he goes on to talk about, how hope is needed for society to build this utopia on earth. That's how usually Francis works. He gives you this wonderful sounding stuff at the beginning, and then it's like the old meme of where something is being pitched from a questionable source and it all sounds good until you get to like the punchline, and that's where it is. And that's where it is there. Utopia on earth. If it had gone on to talk about hope and drives us to do the corporal works of mercy, to correct evils in the culture, okay, fine, whatever. I wouldn't even be bringing this up except saying, hey, maybe this was actually good. But that's what this is. Synodality is this attempt to build utopia on earth by rebuilding the church. And, it's weird because right now, live on the channel is a text, a forgotten text from Cardinal Ottaviani, warning people to not just jump in with both feet towards any kind of Marian apparition or mysticism or anything, that let the church do its thing, right? That those should not be the focus of our faith. But at the same time, I mention this because Marie Julie Jahenny predicted all of this in her Ape of the Church, false church prophecy, where an edifice would be built up, a false edifice would be built up over the church, and behind that edifice would be the deconstruction of Catholicism behind it. And it would look like they had completely succeeded before it would all be swept away and the church would triumph again. I've commented on those before. I've got plenty of her prophecies on this channel for those interested. She was made a blessed by Benedict XVI long after her prophecies were made public, so consider them approved by him, because you wouldn't generally make somebody a blessed with a questionable corpus of work. Patty B does remind us of something. 19 likes only, but 222 watching. Hit the like button. So yeah, please hit the like button. I'm going to now bring you something else here. We often, those of us who have questions about the conclave that gave us Francis or the resignation of Benedict XVI, we all get accused of being sedevacantists. Bishop Strickland has been accused of being a sedevacantist. He published on his Substack a response to it, and it's very short. I thought I'd give that to you today. Now, if you don't know what Substack is, it's sort of like a new blogging platform. It's like the rebirth of blogging. A lot of public figures have a Substack. I've thought about starting a Substack, actually. But this is Bishop Strickland from his Substack. For those who might want to subscribe, I think it's free. I'll put a link to this in my show notes at returntotradition.org, so you can go there after this is over. Just look for the post there. Name of this channel, .org. Look for the post that's clearly about something to do with the two or three videos going live today. It'll be available at about 7 a.m. Central. So here is Bishop Strickland responding to the accusation that he's a sedevacantist. And I'm going to tell you up front, I am not a sedevacantist. I think sedevacantists are Catholic. I just disagree with their final conclusion about the state of the church. That's not actually even a popular position among those of us associated with Recognize and Resist. But I'm not a sedevacantist. And Bishop Strickland is not either. So here's his response to this. Dear friends, recently, as I have endeavored to faithfully defend the Catholic Church and uphold a sacred deposit of faith, a small number of people have begun to falsely label me as a sedevacantist. Let me be clear that sedevacantism is a claim within the Catholic Church that there has been no valid pope since the death of Pope Pius XII in 1958. The term sedevacantist is derived from the Latin word sede, which means seat or chair, and vacant, which means vacant or empty. Sedevacantists therefore hold to the position that the chair of St. Peter has been empty for over 60 years. Most sedevacantists reject the teachings of the Second Vatican Council, and therefore they believe that following the changes implemented as a result of Vatican II, the sacrament of holy orders is now no longer valid. Thus, according to this errant belief, any priest or bishop ordained using the post-Vatican II Reformed rites is not a valid priest or bishop. That would include myself as well as a vast majority of all Catholic clergy throughout the world today. I'm going to pause here. Some of you are going to be upset that he doesn't actually take on that claim. I know. Why he's not refuting that claim or why he's not defending the Reformed sacrament of holy orders. It's not the purpose of his statement. I want to make it clear that I am not and have never been a sedevacantist, as most people who have read my pastoral letters should know. I love the church and I have the utmost respect for the office of the papacy, the vicar of Christ, and I regularly quote the teachings of Pope St. John Paul II and Benedict XVI, as well as other popes who have occupied the chair of Peter since Vatican II. Our Lord established the Catholic Church and chose St. Peter as the rock upon which the church would be built. Let us pray, therefore, that this enduring office will stand and always as a visible sign of truth, clarity, and unity to Christ and to the faithful. Signed, Bishop Joseph Strickland, Bishop Emeritus of Tyler, Texas. Very short statement. He put it on his Substack. It was, to be clear, he has a Substack and a YouTube channel. I would suggest checking in with both of those. But that is where we are here. All right, folks, let's take a look at the live chat here. One Hope for All says sedevacantists are not Catholic. Yeah, they are. They don't deny any dogmas of the faith. They're Catholic. We have this tendency to want to throw out everybody from the church who we disagree with. And they're not denying a dogma through the back door or whatever, other than they're Catholic. Good morning to you, Kay, in Oklahoma City. Neighbor. I'm in Shawnee, so we're not that far from each other. All right, folks, if there's any final thoughts, then we'll end up wrapping this up. I would suggest that you pray for everybody that we spoke about today here. That would be Cardinal Casper, Cardinal Reinhard Marx, any of the people there, as well as Bishop Strickland and anybody else. This is an important thing to be aware of, this attempt to democratize the church, because they believe that they are finishing the will of the Second Vatican Council. And it's an errant belief, to be sure, but that is what they truly, truly believe, that this is what the will of council is, that for 60 years, Vatican II has not been finished. And it's an odd take, to be sure, that with the 60 years or almost 60 years after actually next year will be the 60th anniversary of the closing of the Second Vatican Council. And so it's an odd take to believe that at 60 years later, they haven't been finished implementing the council, but they make that case and they believe that their unleashing of synodality on the church is the will of God, that Francis was placed by God, actively by God, into the papacy at the time that he was, and that synodality will somehow solve the world's problems. That's what they believe. At least those there with some shred of some kind of faith of some kind. But that's what they believe. All right, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.